States. And now his administration is taking a big step towards making that a reality, rolling out deep cuts to the DOE's workforce here in Washington and around the country. And it comes as those new tariffs snapped into effect last night, throwing trading partners, allies, and many U.S. businesses further off balance. This morning, a drastic change to the Department of Education. The Trump administration planning to cut the staff of the agency in half. DOE workers ordered to stay home today, with some 1,300 career employees expected to be terminated. The new education secretary says the president's ultimate goal is to shut down the agency, but that would require an act of Congress.
What we did today was to take the first step of eliminating what I think is bureaucratic bloat.
The Department of Education says it serves over 50 million students across the country. Its staff working on programs from student loans to anti-discrimination laws and campus safety. The head of the advocacy group, the National Education Association, saying, quote, "The real victims will be our most vulnerable students." It comes as President Trump made a show of support for the head of his administration's cost-cutting program, Tesla's CEO Elon Musk. The president displaying Teslas on the White House South Lawn as the company's stock struggles during the general market turmoil this week, with investors still concerned about a possible recession, which the president shrugged off yesterday.
I don't see it at all. I think this country is going to boom.
And overnight, Trump putting in place promised 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from around the world.
We've been ripped off for years by other countries.
Most of the United States' imported steel and nearly all of its aluminum comes from Canada. The two countries avoided more escalation yesterday after Trump threatened heavier tariffs after a Canadian politician briefly taxed electricity in 3 U.S. states, both sides eventually backing down.
So let's work together. Cooler heads have to prevail here.
The tariffs weighing heavily on many businesses, like D.C.'s Right Proper Brewing Company, which gets aluminum beer cans from Canada. How much does any small disruption potentially throw you guys off?
It could be massive. Roughly, if we were to incur a 25% increase in that cost, it would be about over $40,000 for us, which is the cost of an employee.
Well, we're starting to see this cause and effect, Garrett. Reaction and retaliation over these tariffs from some of U.S. allies, some of them in Europe.
That's right. The EU responding forcefully overnight to what they call a proportionate response, placing tariffs on $28 billion of American exports. The South Korean government said it would go into emergency response mode to review ways to beef up what it does next. And China, which does not export much steel or aluminum to the U.S., said it would take all necessary measures to protect its industries.
All right, Garrett, thank you.
Meantime, the prospects of a government shutdown dropped dramatically overnight. With the clock ticking to Friday's deadline, House Republicans narrowly pushed through a short-term spending bill, but now the ball is in the Senate's court to try to keep the government open. And NBC's chief Capitol Hill correspondent, Ryan Nobles, is joining us with the very latest details. Ryan, so where do we stand right now?
Well, Peter, good morning. Last night, Speaker Mike Johnson muscling through this bill by only a 4-vote margin. Only one Republican voting against the bill, one Democrat voting yes. This spending plan will keep the government open until September if the Senate passes it, and it boosts defense spending by roughly $6 billion while cutting non-defense spending by around $13 billion. Now, meantime, the conservative Republican Freedom Caucus, which really has made a name for itself by voting against these kind of bills, voted for it, and that took some lobbying from President Trump himself to make happen. One member called him the difference maker. Now, this show of unity is significant because House Republicans have struggled to pass these bills without relying in some part on Democrats over the past few years, and the likely reason for that is President Trump, who just threatened to primary the sole GOP no vote in Representative Thomas Massie. Peter?
So, Ryan, let's hand this over to the Senate for a moment. The Republicans can't do it alone. They're going to need some Democratic help to avoid a government shutdown.
Yeah, that's right. Very different situation in the Senate, where the bill will need at least a small group of Democrats to be on board. And many of these Democrats have said that they're very unhappy with the bill, but they've also expressed some concern over the prospect of shutting down the government, especially with the toll that the Trump cuts have already taken on the federal workforce. But they will need to decide quickly. If this bill is not passed by Friday at midnight, the government will shut down, and federal workers, including including military families, would be furloughed. Peter?
Here we go again, the potential to go down to the wire on Capitol Hill. Ryan Noble's there for us. Ryan, thank you.
Now to that potential breakthrough in the push for peace in Ukraine. The ball now in Russia's court after U.S. officials announced Ukraine is ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire. In return, the U.S. agreed to resume sending military aid and intelligence to Ukraine. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is on the ground for us. He's inside Ukraine this morning. Richard, good morning to you.
Good morning, Savannah. It has been a wild week for the people here in Ukraine. First, they were cut off by President Trump. Now the government has accepted this U.S. proposal for a ceasefire. This ceasefire is the first serious proposal to stop the fighting here since Russia's full-scale invasion of this country 3 years ago. After a day of marathon talks, Ukraine and the Trump administration appeared to bury the hatchet. The allies now back on the same page. In Saudi Arabia, Ukraine accepted a proposal brought by the U.S. for a total immediate ceasefire lasting 30 days. Ukraine would pause fighting in the air, at sea, and at the front line. But only if Russia agrees as well.
The ball's now in their court.
In exchange for the full ceasefire, more than the partial one Ukraine had been proposing, the Trump administration backed away from its strong-arm tactics, resuming intelligence sharing with Ukraine and the supply of American weapons. Both were suspended after that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office when President Trump and Vice President Vance accused Ukrainian President Zelensky of being unappreciative of American assistance and not being serious about peace. President Trump said Ukraine has changed its position.
The last visit you saw at the Oval Office, and that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow.
Is Zelensky invited back to the White House?
Sure.
President Zelensky thanked President Trump and said the U.S. must now try to convince Russia to stop its attacks, which continued overnight, even after the announcement. We agree, and if the Russians agree, silence will take effect at that very moment, Zelensky said. The Trump ceasefire would not end the war. It does not lay out terms, define territorial concessions, NATO membership, or other security arrangements. But it could pause the fighting in this conflict that has killed and injured around 1 million people on both sides and open the door for negotiations. The Kremlin this morning said it would not respond to the ceasefire until it hears more from the Americans. President Trump is expected to speak with Vladimir Putin soon. Savannah?
All right, Richard, thank you very much.